chaos could be interpreted differently. It's been associated with evil because we've been conditioned to through socialization, but I feel like chaos is not very different than nature. And so, in the sense of the opposite of chaos being things under control, I feel like living in a cage is us living under control. We live in mere survival. We're not thriving. We're merely barely surviving in thrival, living in fear in a cage. But if we were to be able to branch out into nature, like the tribal people have done, and learn to thrive in nature and embrace the chaos of nature, and be able to come out on top and be able to be strengthened by it, I feel like it's a fire that could forge us into thrival as a species. But as long as we stay in fear and live inside of a cage, we're weak. And if we live by the delusion of separation, that's going to make it so that we're easily exploitable. And as we spoke about before, the people that seem to be in power tend to come into a place where they want to control others. And I feel like we should take a look at that. Now, if we're thinking that we are God and God is within me as God is within you, that transcends the delusion of separation in some way. But when we think I am God and I'm the God over all of you and I'm the only one God, if someone wants to think that or say that, they would be putting themselves in a place of self-glorification. They would be removing compassion from their lives, which is a universal principle. Without compassion, you are self-sabotaging your own world and you being the master of that world. So I feel like when one is in self-glorification, it's oftentimes an obfuscation for self-loathing or self-deprecation. A great example of this is men. Men want to be considered to be smart and strong. Why? Because we're insecure. We don't really have much of an investment in creating children. We are able to seed the children, but we don't have the means to create life, and we don't have the means to foster life and feed it. We don't breastfeed life, right? And so men have to come up with more of a function for themselves. We need to have a purpose. And so for us, it's important for us to be a protector and a supporter of our women.
You know, Indy, you bring up a really interesting point, and I'm taking that idea you're talking about, men being insecure, and I'm applying that to actual male deities. Because if you think about like the Christian creation myth, that God creates the universe, but He doesn't create the universe with a woman. He creates it like in like a workshop or something. Like He built it out, and I can't help but feel that idea that you're talking about, men kind of not having their place because they don't really have the ability to directly create an offspring, is actually reflected in these mythologies that permeate our Western culture these days.
Absolutely. And it also shows that in our society, we celebrate technology, which is another word for toys. Men can create toys. Men can create dolls. We can't really create anything that's alive. So we've been so connected to having a huge reliance on all of these tools and these toys. We need these toys to live. We can't live without them.
Mm-hmm.
But do we really, though? And are these toys just another means for exploitation and control? Are we trying to control nature right now? And how's that working out?
So I also kind of sorry, go on.
Oh, go ahead. I just want to say that.
I was to say that I feel like the idea that defining nature as chaotic is kind of part of the propaganda in a sense, because I think that if you really analyze nature, there is an equal amount of order and chaos that exists within nature. Like, yeah, you have the chaotic aspects of nature. You got floods and natural disasters, animals attacking each other, but then you got like the Fibonacci sequence in plants and fractal structures in, cauliflower and other rocks and stuff. So I think that, but you are pointing towards something, the idea that that Western civilization tends to look at nature as chaotic, and we're the ordered ones, and nature is the chaotic ones. But I think, like, kind of like what the Fae, because like one of the things that the Fae have been teaching me, in addition to Zarfexology, is sort of my actual connection to nature. And they kind of point out that by creating that distinction between sort of human beings and the natural world, we say, oh, we're the ordered ones, but we don't realize that we're also part of that chaos. We're part of that chaotic aspect of nature that exists within us, but we want to deny that reality. It's like, it's for some reason, it seems like a lot of these early Christians, it's like they were ashamed of being associated with the natural world. And I think that actually goes back to the Gnosticism thing. That's this sort of the shame of being part of this lower, this realm. It's low. It's chaotic. It's nonsensical, and all these terrible things are going on. And I want to associate with this higher realm where everything is perfect and nothing bad ever happens. But I think, and again, it's like, a denial of a shadow of ourselves. And I think when you like the shadow work thing where you integrate both of those sides, you get a more whole sense of being. And I think when you sort of integrate, when you can see the order in nature and you can see the intelligence in nature, because that's another thing that Faye has been kind of teaching me. It's like there's a weird that we kind of have this weird like human beings, I guess you materialists say, but I guess also probably some Christians too, that there's this very stark divide between conscious beings and sort of unconscious matter. And the Fae are like, no, you have to see that everything has consciousness, but there's different levels and gradations of consciousness that come from two different sides. So you have there's the physical dimension of consciousness. So that's like your panpsychist sort of like feminine aspect of the universe. And then you have the male aspect, which is the kind of the upper, sort of intellectual, the logos, the imagination, the thing that creates toys. And that with interesting that when they talk about like the creation of a self, and I think also the universes too, that when a universe is created, it's created sexually between a male and female energy. And then that's kind of the Gnostic truth, if you will, that I've kind of sort of like discovered that we've kind of been occluded to. And we have this idea that no, it has to be this one God who created everything in a workshop, and there was no sex involved whatsoever. It was and I think, and it's interesting too with that the self and the soul they claim is created in a similar way, is that it's like essentially, basically, if you think about it, people are created when a man and a woman make love, and I think it makes sense that a soul is created when a god and a goddess make love, and that's the creation of the soul. So I think that having those two elements sort of come together, and I think we can get a more accurate and parsimonious and harmonious understanding of reality versus this kind of lopsided, we have to pick one side or the other. We have to either, say that the material world is totally real and that atheism is the truth and all this, astral spiritual stuff is an illusion, or you take the Gnostic side, which is essentially the inverted version of that, where it says, no, this, spiritual world, this is true, and this material, icky, false reality, that's not real. So the way I've been trying to look at it more lately is try to see both sides as equally real and existing in a kind of relationship with each other. And I think when you understand it from that point of view, it makes a lot more sense, and you can actually understand the utility and purpose of why ordered and chaotic elements need to exist to create this sort of larger balance, as opposed to the idea that it has to be one or the other, and that order has to dominate chaos or chaos has to dominate order. But really, they're two sides that need to work together to create the larger, universe at large.
And the denial
go ahead, guys.
Please continue.
The denial of the physical with some Christians, especially the Christian monks, went just way too far, because I believe it is also one of Jesus's teachings that he says, like, cut off or cut out everything that doesn't serve you or that doesn't, or distract you or whatever. So a lot of Christian monks took that as, like, I'm gonna create a eunuch. I'm gonna make myself into a eunuch, because those earthly, fleshly pleasures, it is distracting me. It is not helping me, to gain enlightenment or whatever. Because every time I see a pretty woman, my blood goes somewhere else. So I'm gonna cut that off. That's gonna help. And then it had to be corrected, and everyone else had to be like, okay, no, that's not what we meant. It's probably not what he meant, but I mean, you can take it as far as you want to. And,
Funny that you mentioned the Essenes would do that, I think, or the
there was a particular group who would do that. And Cosmic, when you mentioned like embracing the chaos and it's all part of it and whatever, my mind immediately went to the whole QAnon stuff.
right.
Trust the plan. Everything that you see, it's not happening. It's a movie. It's theaters. They're actors. Trust the plan. Like blindly trust it. Don't ask questions. Just sit back and watch. Because, you will be saved. You are saved. We're just, gathering and collecting everything that we need, to actually create this new world. Novo Order Seclorum.
I feel like
don't believe in their illusions. Believe in our illusions instead.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I feel like if that hadn't been developed, they would have been a bigger push towards liberating the trafficked people, the women and children. I feel like there was a huge push. People were starting to unify to address that, and then that whole thing came out and pretended like it was already taken care of.
It had its good sides. It definitely had its good sides for a lot of people. It was a wake up call. They started to be informed at least about things that were happening that they had no idea was happening. And that's also kind of my belief with the whole QAnon thing, that maybe initially it started out, as a true, well, at the very least, activist group, but with, like higher clearance and people in higher places. Because, I mean, if the enemy has it, then, we can too. But at some point it got, well, infiltrated, or, grifters came in who are making good money off the whole QAnon bullshits by peddling products and live streams and donations and whatever. But yeah, it's indeed, as you said, like, it is very much like, don't believe their bullshit, believe our bullshit. Don't believe that they are gonna save you, we're gonna save you.
Yeah, I think you guys are like onto a lot, looking for the divinity outside of yourself, out there far away, is obviously, we're looking for mirages. And I like what you were bringing up there. And I think it's interesting, like this whole deveneration of the divine feminine. And I think it's almost time to get into the meat and potatoes of Gnosticism, which is, interestingly enough, more like the Vedic school of cosmology than not. I mean, it really venerates the divine feminine beyond all things. And there's a prediction, a prophecy at the end of the Gnostic book of creation in the Nag Hammadi scrolls, which we can look at the end of this little expose. And so, this deveneration of the divine feminine, who was it that mentioned in the chat? I think it was the Chronicles of Satra? Yes. What did he say? And it's so on point. Who sits? Who's Ganga? Come on, who's Ganga? And what's her place in the Sastra Chakra? In fact, not the Sastra Chakra. It's got to do with the source from whence the power that moves through the Sastra Chakra, that produces all of reality as we know it, comes from. We think of it in the inverse as it's like raising up our Kundalini towards that point, but it's also the source of things. The Sastra Chakra is the 1,000 petals from whence all the 1,000 qualities of color, texture, density, size, all these different elements come together to form each different thing. So I do think that the divine feminine has been given a really bad rap because of the twisted form of Gnosticism that has become the New Age, which is a twisted form of Gnosticism, which is Christianity became a registered religion, which is Gnosticism in a different way. That's why I say twisted. Not necessarily twisted in a bad way, although it could be, but twisted in a different way, twisted it to be something that is not. So if we look at the Gnostic book of creation, so where do we start? We start with the Pistis Sophia. Now, the Pistis Sophia is in a place called the good. That's often which it's called in many places, and it's the true spiritual divine plane of pure perfection and divinity. And in this plane of pure perfection and divinity, the Pistis Sophia has within herself the desire to create, to give birth, though her desire becomes conflagrated to a degree. And so what is produced is not in alignment with the plane of existence within which she exists. She becomes ashamed. And in her shame, she wants to get rid of this, I use this word loosely, fetus. And she wishes for this to be proverbially aborted. So now we see there's an idea of abortion here. It's coming into the picture. So she puts this out and puts it into a pocket of darkness, because there was darkness that existed before. Now, this is an interesting thing that's covered. So there's the darkness that existed before. Before what? Well, before anything. We're getting into the divine feminine's real source of its power. There's this chaotic thing that we think is really so bad, but it becomes a shadow. And when this being comes into its own, it awakens upon the waters, because Sophia calls to this being, because this is still her offspring, still her proverbial son. And so she comes from the divine planes, and she looks into the space that she's put it into, and she calls to it, and she goes, Yaldaboath. So this being hears this name, assuming that this name is its own expression of its own consciousness, believing that it is the only being that exists in the whole of creation, that it is the first in the beginning, that it is the Alpha and the Omega, that it is all that there is and all that there was. And so this being then basically starts to mold the darkness around, and it starts to produce from the darkness a kind of an order, shall we say, because the darkness is twisted into a shadow by this being's presence, because this being is not fully conscious, is still in the process of awakening. And that's a very interesting concept. So now we're talking about the proverbial architect of the world. Although as we go deeper into the Gnostic, we see that the architect isn't the architect, because the architect creates beings to be the architect. And so, I mean, Yaldaboath, if we think of Yaldaboath, what are you guys' ideas of Yaldaboath? For those of you that have looked into the Yaldaboath story, look at the name of it. Yaldaboath. Okay, so Yaldaboath. We're starting off with the Iya of Enki. What do you think of that connection?
Wow, if there's a serpent involved there, it's a lion-headed serpent, but the lion is usually associated with Enlil, so I would think it would be more of like a Ningshita, the son of Enlil, who might, like Marduk, use both of his father and uncle symbols. I don't know. It's interesting, though.
I was thinking just now that, you're talking about obviously the Yaldaboath, which is also most, more commonly known as the Demiurge. And I can't help but again see parallels that he's almost like the Demiurge, just almost like the archetypical representation of a New Ager. Because think about it this way, because obviously you referred to that Demiurge, he thinks that he is the only God. And a lot of these New Agers, they think, their God, albeit in a different way, but a lot of these people think I'm this great mystical thing. And then you talk about the whole idea about shaping the darkness into your own creation. I can't help but think about where we're talking about the discussion of chaos earlier, about how New Age takes chaos and recontextualizes it into this kind of distorted order. And I can't help but see that there's a similar parallel with that Gnostic creation myth, that that the demiurge or Yaldaboath is sort of constructing this ideal perfect reality within his own mind, obviously from a corrupted lower standpoint. But if you think about it, it's like each one of these, like this kind of that unhealthy sort of new age or any or really any kind of like cult leader, it's like an archetype for that thing. It's like when you've taken that vision of the universe, you've had that mystical experience, and you think you're God and there's nothing else beyond you. But I can't help but think that with human beings and people, there's actually a very similar dynamic at play, and that each one of these new agers, in a sense, is like their own individual demiurge. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Also, I like to think that the combination of the serpent body and the lion head could represent that there's a body of wisdom with a head of power. And I feel like that could be the interpretation of the symbol. It's interesting.
I think that's very much on point of what it represents. I mean, okay, so Yaldabaoth sees this vision of the light. And this is the recognition that there's something else. He's thinking that it's just him, right? And then he starts to recognize like something's not quite right. And he's shaping the shadow around him. And he's coming into his own, becoming mature, if we can use that word, shaping the limitless chaos from which he came from into an externalized shadow with the light focused within the self. So there's a certain element of narcissism here, I think, being reflected on a personal level. And then he's basically shaping all the deities that become the order of being, the creators, if we can use that word. And this is actually really where we're coming from here. You can enjoy those, but close the door, my boy. I love you. I'm busy on a live now. Yes, you can, but share them with mommy. Close the door, please. Okay, close. Don't ask me again, otherwise I'm going to take them away. I said yes. Okay. He wants to eat the ice lollies that I made him, which is frozen fruit juice. But he keeps he'll have a long conversation with you for like 5 minutes. So then what happens is, from this birth that he's having, he starts to hear another voice, and he realizes that there's something outside of him. And immediately he goes into denial, and that is the birth of envy. And the birth of envy is actually what drives the whole creation process, because now he's got a point to prove. He has to prove that he's the God. He has to prove that he's the supreme being. And so the first thing that he does, and he is referenced as being the first Archon, which is quite interesting. So in these ancient texts, he's referenced as being the first Archon. And we'll get into what the Archons are as we move on, because the Archons are really those that are in charge, those that are in control. And so he then starts to deliberately pull out of himself beings. He's obviously androgynous. From his own androgyny, he pulls out 3 specifically main creators, which are extensions of his own being that become their own being. So we've got Iao comes through. Then we've got Elohe, and then we've got Astophaeos. And so these 3 beings get pulled out of his being, almost as if he polarizes in order to give birth. So here we have the concept of immaculate conception, right? Because the whole idea is that Yaldabaoth was alone and he pulled these beings out of his own body, which means he had to make a sacrifice. He had to sacrifice some part of himself, like proverbially a finger or a toe or whatever, to turn it into another being. Do you see what I'm getting at? So he's sacrificing some part of his own power, of his own agency, in order to bring these 3 fundamental beings into being. And so then what is formed, and Yaldabaoth is able to procreate, and this is important to recognize, because there is a Yaldabaoth is the masculine presence. There's a feminine presence within Yaldabaoth, which is called forethought in this ancient creation doctrine. So forethought and Yaldabaoth become this duality. And Iao is a master duality with mastery. So Iao is able to create from the polarity of Iao being the feminine part of Iao, which is mastery. Then the next being that is pulled out after the Astophaeos is Sabaoth or Shabaoth. Shabaoth is feminine being, is divinity. So these are all androgynous beings, but they have polarities within their androgyny. We've got to understand this concept. And then is Adonais, whose feminine presence is kingship, and Elwes, whose feminine presence is envy, and this comes up later. This is where the jealousy of God comes from in the Bible. And Oreos, whose feminine presence is wealth, right? Feminine being is wealth, the accumulation of wealth. And Astophaeos, this feminine principle is Sophia. So in other words, Astophaeos has actually manifested by the will of Sophia. And so this being holds divinity. For Sophia is the wisdom and the divinity. Now, there are different Sophias in this story. There's the original Pistis Sophia, which comes from the divine beyond this creation. And then there is the Sophia, which is the polarity part of Astophaeos, which is interesting to consider as these different forms of Sophia. Sophia beneath the veil, who has taken a form here in order to play a part of the creation. The part which is played is wisdom. And later on, this other embodiment of Sophia becomes the tree of knowledge of good and evil that can guide people towards the tree of life. So these are the 7 powers: Yaldabaoth, Iao, Shabaoth, Adonais, Elwes, Oreos, and Astophaeos. And so these 7 beings with Sophia, wealth, envy, kingship, divinity, mastery, forethought, are the Sembatos, as it's called. The Shembatos, Shem being name, Batos relating to the 7 divine parts of Yaldabaoth, if we want to consider it as that. But they are individual beings in their own right. So then what happens is these beings are all in gathering, and Yaldabaoth then starts boasting, because they are now creating out of these beings angels. The archangels are creating angels, and the angels are creating a whole multitude of beings. And these are creating the fiery serpent beings and all the other beings which are part of the hierarchy of this creation. And mankind hasn't been conceived of yet. And Yaldabaoth starts to boast, starts to say, like, I am the one God. I am the source of everything. I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am everything. And some of the divine presences around Yaldabaoth start raising an eye, as if to say, like, who do you think you are, buddy? Like, because what has happened is there is this recognition that this doubt. And I think this is interesting. It comes back to the story, like we were talking about Loki. Loki's a god, but Loki's also a giant. So Loki is actually a very interesting story. Like, if you look at it, it's both got the carnal giant genes, which is why they needed that wall, wasn't it? To keep the giants out. Because these gods are really scared of the giants. Like, what are you scared of? Why are you scared of the giants? Because these giants are powerful beings. They've got powers, godly powers. So
Loki's not a god, though. He's not considered to be a god.
No, he's not. But he's the hybrid, isn't he?
Maybe like Thoth is self-created.
Isn't he a hybrid? Wasn't he conceived by a god and a giant? And so he's considered a bastard. He's not a giant. Yeah. He's not a god.
No, but I mean, Odin, Wotan, he's the son of a giant too. Even Thor, Donar, is the son of a giantess. So
But was his mother a goddess or no?
Sorry?
His mother wasn't a goddess, though, or the mother was the giant, but was his father a god?
I'll have to look that up. I don't. I mean, I know he's considered not to be a god, although he does find himself in Asgard, in the realm of the gods. So that is a little odd.
It reminds me of Thoth, because Thoth was not born in the lineage of pharaohs. He was supposedly self-created.
So yeah, Loki is a half breed. He is the son of Farboti, a Jotun, and Laufey, the queen, then I'd say, of the Frost Giants. So yeah, he is half giant, half god, but
Okay, so
I believe
he's
not
like a demigod, maybe. Kinda like
yeah, more demigod than god. I mean, Wikipedia says that he is a god, but many in the Germanic pagan realms will deny that he is a god.
I find it interesting, though, as a demigod, that he can go back and forth between the realms.
That's yeah. Wotan has that power more, but only through Sleipnir, which is a child of Loki. So, yeah. So there is a part of Loki, in a way, that is able to travel through the realms, to travel over the Yggdrasil, just in the form of his child, or one of his children, I should say.
Maybe that's why he can travel through there.
I mean, another daughter of his is Hela, the guardian of Helheim, and she is literally a two-faced being, one half being beautiful, one half being, well, dead.
Did you say Helheim? I thought it was Niflheim.
Helheim.
Is Niflheim also in the underworld? Is that the giants?
Niflheim is like the underworld. That's the realm of punishments.
Where you don't want to go.
Gotcha.
No, but like only reserved for the worst of the worst.
Yeah. So looking at how this all comes to play out, then so we've got this Sabaoth, and Sabaoth is already doubtful of Yaldaboath. If we can call Yaldaboath Sabaoth's father, I'm not quite sure. Father, mother, because there is no masculine or feminine. This is really important to understand, that this distinction which is in the tradition, that it starts with that there is no sex. That's not a male god. We're speaking of a male god, but the male god has a feminine counterpart within it, and it's a male and feminine within one, and it's totally androgyny. So it sort of brings a divine feminine back onto the playing board. And so what happens is this Yaldabaoth gets all arrogant, and I'm the only god, and I'm the one, and like I'm the man. Look at this. Look at the size of my ding dong. It's bigger than everybody else's. Woohoo! Come on, everybody, kiss my feet. And who's sitting watching him from above in the divine plane? Of course, none other than his mother. And Sophia comes down in the form of light. And not everybody can see Sophia coming down in the form of light. But what happens is Sabaoth gets an idea. Like, hold on. What is that? And a lot of the beings see the light. They're concerned by it, but they don't quite know what it means. But Sabaoth then basically falls in love with Sophia, with wisdom. Now, Sabaoth, I want you to think of the Sabbath. The word Sabbath.
Shabbat.
Saturn. And they say Shabbat in Hebrew, but I believe that it's just a bastardization of Paleo-Hebrew, which is the pronunciation of Sabaoth. You see, when you look at the Coptic and the ancient Egyptian, the way they pronounce words, each consonant gets a syllable, right? And in Jewish, they like to, like modern Jewish, they like to like make things shorter. And this is a common thing that happens in later languages. So when we're speaking about Shabbat, we're talking about Shabbat, Shabbatai, as they call it. Shabbatai, if we want to think of it in the old time, like the concept of Saturn. So this is the idea of Chronos in the ancient Greek tradition, what we're talking about. So Shabbat basically falls in love, and he becomes enlightened. And when he becomes enlightened, he becomes the first Archon. Now, is there a story in the ancient Greek story about how Saturn disposes his father? Think about it. There's a story in ancient Egypt as well, right? Who does Set cleans his clocks? Do you remember that story? Set cleans his clocks and chops his body up into 12 pieces and sends him to all different sides of the world, right? The Set is Saturn, is Shabbat. These are the same personality from different traditions. So we've got to look at how all these myths align. And so I believe it's Uranus. Am I right? Check me on that. Ancient Greek, where's Gabriel when you need him? But I believe it's Uranus that gets his clocks cleaned by his son, who is Chronos. Cleans his clocks. He says, that's it. Done with your crap. You're full of it. Bam. I'm the new man on the block. So now Shabbat is fully enlightened because he's accepted that part of himself, which is essentially. Now, here's an interesting part. All of these beings are an expression of the divine feminine. So everything was really created by the divine feminine. The divine feminine created the first being that created all the other beings out of its own body, which was all created out of the body of Pistis Sophia. Do you see how like an important, prominent role the divine feminine has in the creation of the universe as we know it, which is Christianity had to wash that away. This was why the Catholic tradition had to make it illegal. This is why these scrolls were buried in the 3rd century, right? Because you would get like mutilated, burned. Bad things would happen to you if you had these scrolls, or if you were talking them or reading them or knew anything about them. So anyway, so Sabaoth then becomes the Lord of the Powers. And from this, the darkness that is over the waters of the abyss, he rules over everything above this. And the authorities of chaos is now what they are referred to. But he has been enlightened by Pistis Sophia. So it's very interesting because he's a bad guy, then he's a good guy now, but he's still ruling over the waters of chaos. They're still busy basically constructing the universe. The world hasn't come into being in the form of matter as we know it yet. So what happens is there's a war that is then waged against Sabaoth because of jealousy. The authorities of chaos notice that he's the most beautiful. Okay, here's where the story of Lucifer comes in. Are you holding tight? So Lucifer now. So Sabaoth is so beautiful and so enlightened because he has fallen in love with Sophia, which is the fundamental creator of all creation. And so all the authorities gang up on Sabaoth, and there's this huge war in heaven. This war is waged, and it's like it's a terrible, nasty business. And Pistis Sophia then sends 7 archangels to save Sabaoth, who is then carried to the 7th heaven by the archangels during this war. And 3 more archangels are also sent by the Pistis Sophia. And his kingdom is then established above in the 7th heaven. That becomes Sabaoth's domain. This is what we see in the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life when we look at the idea of Bina, which has got the contact to the supernal realm, ruled over by Saturn, right? Sabaoth, essentially who we're talking about. Not really the planetary energy of Saturn, but the spiritual hierarchical presence of that which Saturn becomes a manifestation of, because these beings have different octaves of life in the same way that Pistis is the Pistis Sophia, and then there's the Pistis Zoe, which is moving through the tree of life as we know it. And then there's another element of Pistis which gets locked into the tree of good knowledge of good and evil. So so now we're looking at this new kingdom that is established, and at that point Zoe gets brought into the picture. Now the Pistis Sophia awards him a part of herself, who's also the Sophia, but now this is the Sophia Zoe, which is to act as his consort. I'm not quite sure how to interpret this, but it's awarded to him by the Pistis Sophia. And so now the Sophia Zoe is brought into being because this new kingdom has been created. And obviously she reigns within the 8th heaven, as far as I remember. So then what happens is she is there to teach him all the knowledge about the 8th heaven, so that Sabaoth can know about the 8th heaven and know about how the 8th heaven works. So in the story, there's not just 7 heavens, there's an 8th heaven, which is quite interesting. And so he then creates this huge mansion, which is like this amazing, these mansions of God that you hear about in the biblical story. These were created by Sabaoth. Sabaoth is one of the Archons. So we've really got to scratch our head, like, what are we talking about in this Christian tradition? Yeah, like, there's this monotheism. What is? Yeah, yes, brother.
How did they get to that 8th heaven? Was there a door, or was it just one of the gates, like the 7 gates? Do you know?
I know that it's not accessible.
Right.
I don't know,
because the seven hells and the 7 heavens are represented by the 7 planets and the 7 celestial bodies. The sun being the 4th and central one. And so when they talk about those 7 hells or the 7 heavens, they're talking about going through the gates of the celestial bodies. Back in Sumerian star lore, Manly P. Hall describes that. But it's interesting that they have an 8th gate, so they're definitely taking on new territory. They're moving forward from that foundation of 7.
I think the 8th heaven existed before.
I think so too. I think it's
and all these other heavens were created as a copy of that.
I feel like they talk about the door at the top of the 7 steps of the ladder that you cross through in the story of Jacob's ladder. So yeah, that's fascinating though. Sorry to interrupt. That 8th realm was interesting.
What is that sound? Is somebody
hammering?
Tapping? Oh, is that in the background?
Yeah, I was working on my porch here. He's working on his porch over there now.
Okay, fair enough. I thought it sounded like it was on the keyboard. I thought maybe it's one of the kitties or one of the dogs like scratching. I was like, yeah, it can happen. But yeah, so welcome, namaste. We've got PK with us. How are you doing, PK? Lovely to join us. So anyway, so this is then what happens, and he then creates this heaven, and he creates a throne. And the throne has got 4 faces, and now this is where the cherubim come into being. So they describe the cherubim with the 4 animal faces. And this then becomes a 4-sided structure, like a square. We're talking about Brahma, right? With the 4 faces facing in 4 directions. This is what we're talking about in the Vedic culture. So you can see that all of this cherubim talk and all of this stuff is all coming from Gnosticism that we see in the Bible. And these 4 faces are like this. Each corner, on the right of each corner and on the left of each corner, there are 8 beings that are created, 8 angels. And so there are 4 corners with 8 and 8, which is 4 times 16, which is 72. So these 72 angels are then created around the structures of the 4 sides. And sorry, did I say 78? 72, sorry, 64. Now we're looking at Taoism. We're looking at the I Ching. It gets very exciting. So this structure of this throne has got 8 and 8 on each side, which is 16 times 2, which is 32, and it's doubled up, which is 64. So there are these 64 angels that are ruling around this wheel of the throne. And then, of course, there are the 7 principalities that have come into being, plus the Creator, which then brings us to 72 angels. So this is where the 72 angels of the quinence comes from, on the astrological wheel. And so now we know that the creation story is pretty much what the Bible took. It took it. It's the same, very similar but different. In there's more details being discussed here. And so there's all these 72 figures that stand around, and these 72 figures are referred to as gods. And the 72 angels then rule over the 72 nations. And I believe that these are actual beings, because at a later point, it speaks about how they use their own semen to mix with humans in order to corrupt them. So then the seraphim, the holy, glorious serpent beings that are continually glorifying Shabbat, are around this throne, basically singing praise 24/7. And then the thousands and thousands of angels that are permutations of all of these beings drawn from all of their bodies are created, all these thousands of angels. And from this, then, that glorify him are like this hierarchy of beings that go right up to the top. Then there is a being that is created. This is the first time we see the word Israel. So this is why they had to create a state called Israel, by the way. So Israel is then a being that is created through this process, and this is a being that can actually see the divine, see all of the divine. So that's quite interesting. And this being that can see the whole of the divine is created, Israel, and another one that's created is the Isha Christos, the Savior, as we know it. So Israel and Christos are created, and these two are almost like as above, so below, almost as if we are suggesting that there's a kind of a polarity between these two presences. And these all stand beneath the chief creator. And the chief creator is now a different being. I'm not sure who this is. Jealous of Sabaoth, it becomes really confusing, because Sabaoth is now being taught about the mysteries of the eighth heaven. And these beings are all denied the mysteries of the eighth heaven. So I think Sabaoth comes back as that being Christos and as that being Israel, as these two permutations of that being. In other words, it's confusing to understand as a concept, but I believe that all these beings are taken from the bodies of other beings. We see this as a reflection in all of the different kinds of cosmogony of all the sacred traditions. Seems to be like a pattern that the beings sacrifice part of themselves or their bodies to come into this. And then what is created is death is created. And the sixth heaven is then established. And then we have the androgynous beings, the 7 children that come from this. And they are envy, who is androgynous with anger, wrath, which is androgynous with pain, tears, which is androgynous with lust, sighs, androgynous with sighs. We're talking about Mercury, we must be, because it's the only one that is a pure total androgyny. So we can sort of plot the archetypes on this. Then we've got grief, which is androgynous with curses, and lament, which is androgynous with bitterness, which is lamenting and bitterness is one being, but a masculine pole of lament and the feminine pole of bitterness. And tearful groans, which is androgynous with strife. So these are the 7 beings which are androgynous, which basically have male and female aspects or parts of themselves that are created. And these then, each of them creates 7 children out of their body that produce the 49 daemons. So these are the 49 gates in the occult tradition that we will hear about, right? If you do a research into the 49 gates, which is what we're talking about, the 49 daemons. These are created out of these 7 androgynous beings, each of them having 7 children, producing this 49 daemons. And the chief creator then sees Pistis, but now it's a very clear vision of Pistis. And the other beings, the hierarchy, also notice the light of Pistis, Sophia. And they're all sort of like shaken up, like, what is this presence? Where does it come from? We thought we are all there is and that you are our creator. Like, who is this? Are you not our creator? He's like, no, I'm the omnipotent one. I'm the Alpha and the Omega. I'm the one who was here. Nothing was there before me. Then what is that like light that's coming down? Where is it coming from? One of the beings is there with him. And this light is shining down from the 8th heaven where Pistis Sophia is. And forethought happens to be with the chief creator. And forethought, present with the chief creator, sees this. And forethought actually falls in love with the messenger. So this gives us a little bit of an insight into who the chief creator is, right? If we go back and look at forethought, who is forethought's polarity? Let's just go and take a look. Can you guys remember? My memory is not so clear on this. Yaldaboath. So Yaldaboath is back in his position now because his challenger has risen to the higher. So you see how confusing this gets. Yaldaboath there'd been a war, but Yaldaboath is back now. So Yaldaboath is back in on his throne that has been created by his proverbial son, who has now ascended to the 8th, or busy in the process of ascending to the 8th heaven. And Yaldabaoth's feminine counterpart is forethought, and forethought falls in love. So what does forethought do? Sees the Pistis Sophia. Now he has the first sort of semblance of lesbianism in the heavens. She falls in love with Pistis Sophia. She would love to mate with Pistis Sophia, but it's not possible. So she pours out her light. And out of this light, this messenger that has been sent. Now, it's not Pistis Sophia that's coming down directly. Pistis Sophia has manifested the first primordial Adam, Adamus. Before Adamus has been created as a body, as a being, this light presence is what comes down as the messenger of Pistis Sophia. And so this forethought has got a secret love in her heart for this messenger who's doing the work of Pistis Sophia. But obviously, Adamus is pure and divine and wants to have no part of this forethought, because forethought is considered of darkness in this tradition, which is interesting. It's frowned upon. Forethought, which is what leads to people doing bad things, apparently, the idea of forethought. So anyway, Adamus is there. She pours all her light and her virgin proverbial blood. And this is where the idea of virgin blood comes from in sacrifice. It's the idea of forethought pouring out her light. And when she pours out her light, who comes into being? Eros. Eros and Hemaros, right? So sexual desire comes into being upon this divine vine of creation. And so this is the beginning of Eros, the beginning of desire, the beginning of all of this. And justice also in this reality is creating within paradise. So Eros is connected to a force of justice. I'm not quite sure how this works out. So you see how complicated this particular pantheon is. And this is the structure of what becomes Christianity. So justice, the creator, is in paradise. And this is very interesting. There's one reference in this text which says, beyond the eastern rocky ranges, beyond the eastern rocky ranges, there's a paradise that's created. And this paradise is being created I believe, by Eros or by justice. I think justice is the sibling of Eros, if that makes sense. Eros is supposed to move people towards justice. Look, when you fall in love with the world, do you want to do what's with a woman? Do you want to do what's right by her? You want to do what's right. You don't want to hurt the woman. You want it to be your, you want to do as much good as you can. What happened? We had someone coming and arriving. Shinobi's coming. So yeah, and then we see that in this place across the east, they specifically say the east, past the rocky regions. Are we talking about past the ice wall that exists today? Was that a rocky regions? Is that big wall of ice there? Are those actually big cliffs when there's not ice? Food for thought, man. Food for thought. Makes you think. That makes the idea that we're on a bigger planet like really sellable when you start to look at this. This is where these ideas come from, that we're on a planet that's much bigger than what we think, and that we've been lied to about the size of our planets, because they actually take these ancient texts and they look at them and they go, well, these are really weird statements to be making, that you got to go past the huge big rocky walls far to the east, and if you travel far to the east, you're going to get where you're going to get to. Yeah. So and we're talking about
makes you think of the Himalayas. Rocky Wall.
Could be.
Shambhala was supposedly behind that.
Well, now we've got these legends of Shambhala. So anyway, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil are both coming into being in this way, and so that's where that happens. And the tree of life is said to be with white grapes, and the tree and it's related to the sun. And the tree of knowledge is related to the lunar presence, and it is said to have fruit-like figs, according to this Gnostic tradition. I'd love to welcome, dear brother. We've got Shinobi here. Oh, he's got a nice backdrop. Welcome, dear brother Shinobi. Shinobi has been pouring out some really interesting, fascinating concepts. He's a philosopher in his own right as well, and a researcher, an avid researcher of many, many things, both occult and philosophical, word-related knowledge, which is, the logos, as well as what's going on in the world. He can tell us all sorts of stuff about like what's happening with the water companies. So it's an honor to have you here with us. We've got a really great circle here. Welcome, dear brother, and do please say a few words.
Hi guys, great to see you all. Hope you're all doing well. Been listening on and off for the last couple of hours. Some great topics have come up so far. While we're talking about Eros, I just wanted to put it out there that could Eris be kind of the opposite of Eros? Like you have the goddess of discord, and then you have the god of love on the other side. So like you have kind of Eros, justice, love, and then the other side, swap the eye for the eye, and you have Eris, like the shadow, deceit. And I had actually pulled out some stuff to share about Eris. If it's all right to share my screen for a moment.
Yeah, she's the Discordian goddess.
Yeah.
Well.
So let me just share my screen real quick.
You can click present.
Do you know about the story of the golden apple with Eris?
No, I haven't heard that
story.
Right, share screen. Share screen.
Welcome back, dear Cosmic. Yeah, if you click the button present at the bottom, it will open
window.
up a tab, and then it will say share screen. Yeah.
So if I share the window, let me know if you can see. Okay. Right. I'll just hang on. Can you see Eris? Can you see this window?
You can just, if you go on the top right corner of that tab and make it larger, it will get larger, the words. I don't know It was just my eyes.
Can you
I'm
see
not the
what I'm
speed
looking
checker
at?
I
Though?
used
It's
to be.
hard to read at the moment.
Right. Okay. Let me just share my whole screen for a minute.
Yeah, if you just go in the top right corner and you make it larger, then it will get larger and larger.
All right, so in the story of Eris, Eris was not invited to the wedding of Peleus and Thetis. So she threw a golden apple inscribed with the words, "To the fairest," amongst the guests. And the three goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, all tried to claim the apple, and so all this drama ensued. She created chaos out of revenge.
Well, I'm not sure if sharing my screen is working. I'll try and figure that out. But yeah, the
Do
reason
you know what I
mentioned-
recommend?
Yeah.
Do you know what I recommend you do?
What's that?
Is that a Google tab that you got to open?
Yeah.
There?
Yeah.
So what you do is you open when you go share, it gives you an option. You click present, and it says
Yep.
share screen. You click share
Mhm.
screen, and then you click share screen, and it'll give you a series of options there. Where on the left it says Chrome tab, in
Yep.
the middle it says window, on the right it says entire screen. Just click Chrome tab.
Okay.
And select from the Chrome tab you got open. Make sure that Chrome tab is maximized, right?
Okay.
Click that Chrome tab, and then once you've opened that Chrome tab, you go to the top right corner of the Chrome tab, and then basically you will be able to make it get bigger and smaller. I'll give you an example. I'll share something random, so I'll share a screen here. I'll choose
I've
share
got
screen.
quite a few
I'll
things
choose
to share later.
Nagamadi Scrolls, share it. Now you can see there it is. Now I can, on the top right corner here, if you can see my mouse, I just go zoom, zoom, zoom. Yeah.
I can't see where your mouse is.
Oh, well, my mouse is, can you see this little window that opened up on the right-hand side here?
Nope.
On the corner. Oh, there's a little bar on the right. You can go up and down.
Yeah. If you open that bar up, I don't know if you guys can't see it, but if you scroll down, it says zoom, and then it says zoom, and it's about halfway. It's in the middle of that bar. So if you click the three dots on the top right corner, it'll open up a bar, and right in the middle it says zoom, and you can go minus,
Okay.
and it
Yeah,
says
I've
what
got it.
percentage it's at.
Okay.
Cool.
That will basically you'll be able to control pretty much how big the words are.
Right, I'll give that a go then.
I didn't know.
So share tab.
But yeah, you guys were banging on about Eros. Please don't let me disturb your flow, brothers.
Yeah, and Eris was chosen by Robert Anton Wilson to be the figurehead of Discordianism, and the golden apple is a representation of Discordianism. It's another one of its icons.
I also can't help but point out when you point to that the apple of fairest of them all. I can't help but think of Snow White and the witch asking the mirror who is the fairest of them all. And I wonder if there's a link between those two things.
It definitely is, yeah. And the apple of Sleeping Beauty, she bit that apple. It's definitely intertwined in there. They kind of dismantled it and turned it into a bunch of different stories.
So yeah, the reason why I want to share my screen, can you all see this?
Yeah, now we can see
Yeah,
it.
brother.
Okay,
It's
cool.
much
Right,
better.
so yeah, Eris is the Greek goddess of discord and strife, like we've mentioned. And I just wanted to share this. This COVID variant came out. It's EG5 called Eris. It came out 2 days before the October 7th attacks in Israel, which caused discord. And I just thought that was quite interesting that 2 days before there was a COVID variant, because I've been thinking maybe these variants are just sort of signals. So when there's the Eris variant, it's a warning that there's going to be some kind of discord. And EG5 would be 17, which is an 8. It narrows down to an 8. and then the 7th of October. Oh God, what did that equal? I did some maths earlier, and they both equaled the same number that I thought was interesting. So 5 and 5, 17, which means 8. Yeah, anyway, I just thought it was interesting that 2 days before the October 7th attacks, there was a COVID variant.
5 is also a big number in Discordianism. It's Robert Anton Wilson also talks about the law of 5. Now everything is related to the number 5. So I thought that was also, I just wanted to point that out too, because you mentioned October 5th.
It was October the 7th, but the COVID variant was
that's what I meant.
5. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the number 5 is the key. Look, when we break down the number 5, so what we were talking about in this form of creation is that there are 64. We've got to understand the 64 vectors of a vector equilibrium, which is the mathematics of an event horizon, if we want to consider it as such a concept of matter arising out of light. You need to have these 64 vectors bound. This is how you create the vector equilibrium. And so this is reflected by the 64 trigrams, which are triangles, which are actually hexagrams in the I Ching. And these 64 are ruled over by the 7 Archons who are under the direction of the Supreme Archon, Yaldaboath, which is 8 Archons, which makes 72 Archons. So the 72 quinants, if you look at a pentagram, there are 72 degrees. Whichever direction you look at, whichever part of the pentagram you move around, it's 72 degrees on one side and 108 on the other. So in India, this rosary is a 54 bead rosary, because I when I use it, it's a double hit. I go one way and the other way in order to make 108. So 108, there are 108 deities of Shiva, 108 deities of Vishnu, 108 deities of everything. And then within the permutations, it's 1,080 names of the 108 deities of Shiva, 1,080 names of the 108 deities of Vishnu and Brahma, and each goddess. So it's the 108 represents the reflection of 9, right? Because you got the 100, which is a decad, and then you got the 8 presence, which is the 7 rulers under the prime 8th ruler. There's the 8th hidden chakra called the Hrit Padme, which won't be discussed in Vedic cosmology, but it's right in the place where Tipharat is in the Tree of Life. See? So, and it represents that very profound Hrit Padme, is that divine connection, which transcends this physical realm. And Saturn, Shabaot, as far as my system, it comes into the solar power, the green man, which is the solar plexus. And so this power of life is bound through the solar fire, which is why the triple burner is what gives us our instincts to stay alive. Fight or flight instinct comes from the triple burner, which is rooted in the Hrit Padma, which is rooted in the solar plexus, which is like part of the spirit of rhythm, and all the rhythms of metabolisms in the body is governed by the pancreas and the stomach in the solar power. So this is why solar worship has been such a big deal. So it's interesting, you know. I think we're getting a little bit off course here, but the eros is a very interesting concept, and so what happens is there's jealousy now, right? Because justice is off building this what's the word of that place where you want to be? Justice is building a utopia, right? Paradise. And the tree of life and the tree of knowledge are put in this. Now the powers, the architects, they want to discover the tree of life. They want to get to the tree of life. They wish to eat from the fruit of the tree of life to gain eternal life, because they do not have eternal life. Here's where it gets interesting. These beings in these creations do not have eternal life. Humanity, Adamus, comes directly from the 8th heaven, This is what makes us so special with the free will. This is why the angels don't have free will. It's one of those things that no one's ever understood in the Bible. Why don't the angels have free will? Why do humans have free will? What makes us humans so special? Well, we emerged from the eighth heaven. And from the eighth heaven, there is no king. And only the perfect can arise from the eighth heaven, because you need to be perfect to be ungoverned, which means you've got total free will, which is what we bring to this world. Without humanity in this world, there could be no free will. Interesting concept. So anyway, the jealousy comes about, and the dark rulers make a plan to try and possess this Adamus. But in order to possess the Adamus, they need to create shells for these Adamus to live in, like kind of forms, and trick Adamus to live in these kind of bodies. And these are the first bodies that are created, not the second. I think they created a second one later. So anyway, what happens is they manage to sort of enslave humanity to a certain degree into these bodies, but in the process, they enslave themselves. And so then what happens is Psyche is in love with Eros, right? And because Psyche is in love with Eros, which is the soul, is in love with Eros. Eros is that expression of the divine, which is what brings procreation into being. Without Eros being present within Yaldaboath, he couldn't have brought out of himself all of these beings. It's a fundamental part of procreation, is Eros. So now Eros is like being distinctified or put into its own context and its own light. So Adamus is then put into this body, but after 2 days ascends in light. And after ascending in light, after 2 days, comes down, and then is created the 6 realms below the 8th heaven, which is interesting. The 7th heaven has already been created, because that is the realm of Shabaoth. And so the 6th heavens below this is then being created. Oh, and another name for Yaldaboath, by the way, is Ariel. That's what he's mentioned in these Gospels. So Ariel, and Ariel is an interesting name because it represents the archetypes of Aleph, the power of the life force, intelligence; Resh, the front of the head, which is the intellect that drives the ability to think, free will; and Yod, which is the seed of creation, that finger of the divine, which drops the potential, the seed, the sperm, the yolk of what can become new life. And it is then driven by the life force, which is now coupled with the Lamet. So back to the Aleph and the Lamet, which become a union of El, which is one of the premium, most used deities in the Judaic tradition, which represents the will of dynamic life force under the distinction of balance and harmony, which represents Libra and the scales of justice. So justice mixing with and justice is represented by Libra. So in this justice is also where we find the gateway to the knowledge of good and evil, the tree of good and evil, which leads us to the tree of life. So they wanted to take this away from humanity, because the tree of good and evil of knowledge of good and evil was put there by the Pistis, Sophia, in order that one Adamus has been tricked by these dark entities into forgetting himself. He can be replenished by this tree of knowledge of good and evil, and it can lead him back to the tree of life. Anyway, these are the like basic ideas being expressed in these texts. Then the authorities plot to create a trap. And now not only are the forms created, but now actual physical earth bodies are created. That's the final trap that they create. And these earth bodies, they're then trapped to enslave humanity. And it is the undoing of themselves when they do that. And so this physical reality is then an extra reality which is added onto the etheric reality, because first he was given an etheric body, which we were talking about just now. Now that etheric body is being tuned into a physical, and now we're talking about the matrix body, as we see and feel it here, the matrix reality, which is a reflection of the etheric body, but it's the matrix. So, and obviously this is then created into a form which is hermaphrodite to begin with. Interesting that it says that human's first form was hermaphrodite. This is what we see in the Enki documents, right? That humanity was not procreating in that way. What an interesting concept. How did we come into being if we were hermaphrodite to begin with? Could we change our sex? So anyway, the Immaculate Conception is something that's, I think, rooted in the first beginnings of humanity's development. Then the chief creator imprisons humanity in these bodies, and for 40 days, Sophia, after 40 days, Sophia blows light and consciousness into this body because they had forced this body to lie down. I think when they say force this body to lie down, they had forced the body to become immoral, because I think it's a metaphor, but that's my interpretation. But it says lie down. Then after 40 days, Sophia Zoe, which is a personality of the Pistis Sophia beneath the veil, blows into the Adamus body and thus comes to destroy the chaos build that's in the ground. And so the potential of light is within. And within this, there's a distinction now between Eve and Adam. And Eve says to Adamus in the story, get up. And he does. And so the authorities are now enraged. And guess what they want to do? They want to rape Eve. We see these stories in the Vedas. We see these stories around where these beings, the godly beings, want to get hold of this goddess being and they want to rape her because they want to make offspring with her. So in so doing, and I think they managed to get with the program, they want to rape Sophia Zoe. Now, Sophia Zoe has got a connection with Eve. Sophia Zoe escapes to this paradise where she actually goes into the tree of knowledge and good and evil as a guide for humanity in order for them to find the tree of life. Then the first Adam, then there are 3 Adams that are created. So the first Adam is a spiritual Adam. The second Adam is a physical Adam. And the third Adam is an earthly Adam. You see, physical, when they say physical, they mean etheric. Earthly, they mean physical, earthly, like we know earthly. And Aphrodite comes into being after the creation of the third Adamus. And so here they mention how Aphrodite is now ruling over this Adamus being, to a sense, to a certain degree. And all the beings upstairs now, if I can call it upstairs, they're terribly afraid of Adamus. They're afraid of this being that has been created of light, because they realize now that within this being is the seed that can take this being to the 8th heaven, and they don't have access to the 8th heaven. So, I mean, these authorities then want to see what divinity has been blown into Adam by Sophia, by the Zoe Sophia. So they test Adam, and they test Adamus by getting him to name all the animals. This is what we see in the Bible, right? And when they get the Adamus to name all the animals, they recognize and realize that he is fully awakened and he's become enlightened because he has all this unlimited knowledge. I feel like I'm talking too much. So what do you guys think so far of this story? Isn't it way out there? Isn't it wild?
It kind of reveals a lot about sort of the nature of kind of the male psychology and or just humanity and its relationship with the universe and nature. And it's kind of interesting. You see, I'm actually kind of thinking of something kind of unrelated now. I'm thinking about certain people who have like narcissism, or like people who are psychopaths, and they sort of like lack that spark, and they kind of, that spark of sort of like that real awareness, and there's a sort of a jealousy and a resentment towards other people who do have that kind of more aware sort of normal consciousness. And I can't help but see that at a parallel to the thing you're talking about, how these archonic beings are sort of jealous of humans, of the human ability to sort of reach this eighth heaven. And I just thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was a great story so far. I love it. And it's really fascinating. There's a lot of implications in the story because it's more in depth than the story we usually hear. So I feel like it could really explain an impetus for like body shame, for example, for her to cover up a little bit more or something like that. Be scared to be exposed in the public. Also, maybe like Adam, if Adam were to take a blow in the ribs and maybe like get a broken rib from trying to protect her from those guards, could explain a lot more than just creating her from a rib. I mean, I don't know. I think there could be a lot more there where we could find these other translations could have come from. It could explain the real root story behind it all. I feel like the game of telephone had been played, leaving us where we're at before that, before being able to see these insights from the older story. You know, we didn't really see too much real depth of wisdom in the story of Adam and Eve. It seemed like there was a lot of mention of covering up their ability to find wisdom and to find knowledge. So, but this story shows that they were in a struggle, which the reader can really identify, and maybe were able to overcome this, maybe by having to leave. And through their exile, it was kind of a blessing in disguise. So there's a lot there, and I'm really fascinated with this. So this is a great story, and I love that Franklin can bring this to the table. Is there more to the story that you're going to go through with? Or?
There is more to the story, and we will also share the link in here later on for a guy who you guys should like support and love. I actually haven't financially supported him, but he's one of the guys I want to financially support. He's just so much bloody good work. He's got the most amazing voice, and he reads these texts, and many of these things you can actually read the texts, the translations of the texts, and he actually reads them out to you. So it's a great way to actually sit and meditate on it, because the guy's voice is so amazing. He's got the best voice, and he does a lot of occult texts, like a lot of occult texts. A lot of respect for the guy. He's also got a YouTube channel, but he's also off on Patreon. So anyway, so where are we on the story? I made a few notes that I don't lose my place. So the authorities have been testing Adamus, and they want to shorten his life, but there are rules. And here's where it gets really interesting. Okay. So they want to shorten his life, but there are like big rules to the story. They can't just shorten his life, but they managed to be able to shorten his life, I think, by 70 years. Each one of them is able to minus 7 years from his life. No, 10 years from his life. And there's 7 of the authorities that are each able to enact this. But, and yeah, you guys on the edge of your chairs, I hope you are. The human lifespan is supposed to be 1,000 years. And so they are able to minus 70 years from this 1,000, leaving a 930-year lifespan. Now, in the Bible, you see all these old, long lifespans. People say, oh, it's this, it's that. I think they figured out how to shorten our lifespans, dude. Dark sorcery.
Yeah,
so anyway.
They put telomere caps on the end of our chromosomes. I think that's how they did it.
I think they might do it through diet, poison, weapon system. They can live for probably 1,000 years or more, and they feed us things that weaken us, that we make our staples. Also, probably missing out on gold and Ormus, things like that. Like they say that we need iron. Well, do we need gold? I think we do.
It makes us think about this philosopher's stone, doesn't it? Ormus.
Mm-hmm.
That the ancient Egyptians were using to extend their lives and to gain occult powers, no? You've done a lot of research into that, haven't you?
Yeah. There's mention in the book of the Green Tablet, Emerald Tablet, that when Thoth was able to open gates to another realm through the gold, Ormus, And then through forth came once a demon that was like a hog with fiery breath and dragon-esque kind of beast. But he was able to fight it back and impressed all of the other sages among him, and pushed it back into the dark realm. But he disappeared into a different gate, which opened up for him. And so
I wonder if that serpent being had a lion quality to it.
yes, it was very much like an amalgamation of different creatures. I think lion was definitely part of the creature. And so we see there that the Ormus was used there in the story. It may be a figurative story, it may be a literal story, but the Ormus can allow psychometry, what's known today as psychometry, the ability to touch something and through touch experience its origins. And so through ingesting the Ormus, you may be able to do different things by just through being within and having these journeys within from the Ormus inside, because there's a lot within us that it can come in contact with as well and show us our origins of ourselves.
My research took me to the point that these monatomic gold filaments, because this is like a white substance, which is monatomic gold now. Well, it's considered as a white stone, isn't it? And or a white kind of the philosopher's stone. Excuse me. These monatomic filaments can sort of become the staff of Hermes in our DNA. So you got that DNA spinning like that and spinning like that and spinning, and these things can become like fixed with the DNA spinning around them, and so things last longer. And the acoustic quality of the DNA gets the gold acoustic resonant frequency in it, which makes the mind very powerful, like mind over matter. I think this is the idea behind it. And it apparently it changes the nature of the astral planes by people that have like experimented with it. Very dangerous though. Very, very dangerous.
Yeah, a guy named David Hamilton was able to find some Ormus in his backyard in Texas, but in order to do experiments with it, he had to go to China because it was immoral here. Apparently, he had a hard time with the studies. The Ormus drove a lot of people crazy, according to the studies. But I think it's like a lot of things. You have to be in a very pure state of purity of heart and mind through years of practice in worship and prayer. And then when you take that, it really has a power to elevate that. But without that, I think with impurities within you, it can be very difficult to experience those experiences, a higher state.